The night was a long tunnel without an end, and the janitor moved through it with the sound of his broom like a tired heartbeat. The halls stretched wide and pale, the museum, a husk of glass and stone, breathing softly as if asleep. He had worked here so long that he could walk every floor blindfolded and still find the light switch in the dock. He knew where the air turned colder near the locked archives, where the old paintings watched with faces that never blinked. He knew how the pipes moaned when the rain came, and how the marble floors kept secrets under their smooth, quiet skins. Sometimes, when he walked past the dinosaur wing, he would stop and look up at the bones suspended above him, white ghosts against the ceiling, and think how strange it was to clean the dust from creatures that had outlived entire ages and now depended on his mop to stay presentable. He did not believe in the word important, but sometimes he whispered it to himself just to see how it felt in his mouth, like a foreign language he could almost understand. Night shift was his refuge and his sentence, both at once. The world outside was too fast, too loud, too cruel, with all its faces that looked through him without ever stopping. The museum was different here. No one expected smiles, no one asked questions. The only company was the hum of the air vents and the steady flicker of lights that sometimes dimmed for no reason. As if the building itself grew tired, he pushed the cart through the east corridor, where the walls held photographs of explorers, their frozen smiles and heavy coats forever trapped in snow and time. He wondered if any of them had felt this same ache that came when the hour turned past midnight and the silence grew thick enough to hear his own heart echoing back at him. He stopped to rest his hands on the broom handle, his palms rough, his knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing and lifting and fixing what others broke. He looked down at his reflection in the polished floor. It shimmered faintly in the pale light, and for a moment he did not recognize the face staring back, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the quiet that had grown there like moss. In the distance something rattled. Maybe the vents again, maybe the door settling against the wind, he told himself. It was nothing, he always told himself. It was nothing. The mind plays tricks when there is no one left to correct. They rolled the cart on again, passing the gift shop, the broken vending machine, the office with the window that never opened. Every sound amplified: the click of the wheels, the scrape of his shoes, the drip of a leaky pipe. Somewhere far off, the museum was a hollow cathedral for memories that no longer had visitors. He sometimes imagined that the statues breathed when he was not looking, that the marble eyes blinked just once to remind him he was not alone. And then stillness returned, heavier than before. He reached the main atrium and stood beneath the hanging globe, the world suspended above his head, silent and perfect and empty. He tilted his head back and let the quiet sink into him until it felt like the building was listening to his thoughts. And maybe it was, maybe that was why he kept talking to himself under his breath, as if the walls might answer back someday, as if the echo might grow into something alive. The storm began as a whisper at first, a low murmur behind the distant walls, like the world outside clearing its throat. Before it screamed, the janitor heard it while he was changing the trash bag in the hallway near the fossil room. The wind pressing itself against the windows as if begging to be let in. He paused, his hands frozen above the bin, and listened. The hum of the museum swallowed by the growing growl of thunder, the first drops of rain striking the glass roof above like fingers drumming in impatient rhythm. He had heard storms before. This city was known for them, but tonight it sounded different, deeper, like the sky itself was cracking apart and spilling its anger across the streets. Outside, he imagined the rainwater running down the marble steps, the gutters overflowing, the empty parking lot turning into a lake of trembling reflections. The thought made him shiver. Though the air was warm inside, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. He looked up, waiting for them to fail completely, because they always did during heavy storms, but they held as if the building refused to surrender. He moved toward the main doors just to check the seals, the way he always did, out of habit, not out of worry, he told himself. Yet there was something in the sound outside that tugged at him, something alive in the roar and hiss. The glass doors trembled in their frames, each gust of wind pushing harder than the last. He pressed his palm to the surface and felt the cold through it, like a heartbeat on the other side, steady and slow, not like the wind at all, more deliberate, more rhythmic. He frowned, leaned closer, and heard it again, soft tapping, light and uncertain, not the random scatter of rain, but a pattern, like someone too small to knock but too desperate not to try. He waited. The tapping stopped. The thunder rolled overhead, shaking dust from the rafters. He turned away, shaking his head. Tired imagination, that was all it had to be. He had gone too many nights without sleep, too Many hours talking to walls, he went back to the broom, the cart, the bucket, the endless path of repetition. The sound came again, this time sharper, closer, as if right against the bottom of the door. The broom slipped from his hand, the handle clattering across the floor, the noise echoing like a shout in an empty church. He held his breath, straining to listen, his pulse louder than the rain. The tapping became a scraping, soft, drawn out like claws dragging lightly against metal. He felt it in his teeth. More than he heard it, a strange vibration that carried through the floor. He backed up one step, then another, every instinct whispering to leave, to walk away, to pretend he had not heard. But then came the whimper, faint, fragile. Not human, not animal, something in between. It reached him like a plea, too small to be dangerous, too honest to be ignored. He swallowed his fear and took another step toward the door, his reflection staring back at him from the glass, pale and uncertain behind the flashes of lightning. He crouched down, the mop water still dripping behind him, the smell of dust and rain heavy in the air. He pressed his ear to the seam of the door and listened again. Nothing but the storm for a long moment. And then once more that quiet voice of movement that could have been anything or anyone or something entirely new, waiting just beyond the edge of his world. The janitor stood before the door, his breath slow and shallow, the storm pressing against the glass, as if it too wanted to know what waited outside. He counted to 3, though he had no reason to count, then reached for the handle, his fingers trembling with something that felt like memory or maybe just fear. The metal was cold, slick with condensation, and when he turned it, the sound was swallowed by the roar of wind. The door opened a few inches and the rain rushed in with a hiss like a living breath. He blinked against the wet, the world outside, a blur of silver and gray, the light from the hallway spilling out in a narrow ribbon across the concrete, and in that faint glow he saw it, the small shape curled near the threshold, shivering, a bundle of slick scales and folded wings, no bigger than a stray cat. He thought at first it must be some strange bird hurt and lost, blown in from somewhere far away, but then it lifted its head and 2 golden eyes met his. For a moment the world stopped. The storm became distant, the thunder muted under the weight of that gaze. The eyes glowed faintly like melted metal, and in them he saw both fear and something else, something old and endless that did not belong to the world of people. The creature let out a soft sound, almost a cry, its breath rising in faint curls of steam against the cold air. He crouched low, the rain soaking through his sleeves, his knees aching against the hard floor. He whispered without thinking, "Are you hurt?" The creature tilted its head, one wing twitching, then tucked tighter against itself as if ashamed of its own body. He saw the small claws dark against the wet ground, the long tail coiled around its legs. A shimmer of dull blue where the light touched it. He reached out, then stopped halfway, uncertain if touch was kindness or threat. The creature shivered again and made a sound, softer now, closer to a sigh, and then it spoke, the voice, quiet, fragile words, shaped around breath and pain. "Can I sleep here tonight?" And he froze, the sentence so small, so impossible that it slipped past reason and settled straight into his chest. He felt it echo through every empty place inside him. He nodded, though he did not trust his voice, and the creature blinked once, twice, slow, like it understood. It tried to move forward, but its legs faltered, so he reached under its body carefully, the scales warm and smooth beneath. His rough hands, lighter than he expected, trembling but not resisting, he lifted it into his arms and carried it inside, closing the door with his elbow, the sound of the latch cutting off the storm. Like the world itself had taken a breath and gone still. He set it down near the heater, the old machine rumbling softly, alive again after weeks of silence. He found a rag from the cart and draped it across the small body, watching steam curl up as the water dried. The creature's wings shifted just once before it settled, head resting against its tail, breathing slow and steady. He knelt beside it, soaked through, exhausted, unable to look away. The thunder rolled one last time, fading into distance, and he listened to the quiet drip of water from his clothes, the hiss of the heater, the faint rhythm of another heartbeat beside his own, and he thought, maybe this was what it meant to be found without knowing you were lost, until something asked to start. The janitor sat cross-legged on the floor, his back against the wall, his clothes dripping small puddles around his boots, the little creature breathing softly beside the heater, its scales glinting faintly in the dull light like wet glass touched by fire. He watched the slow rise and fall of its chest, the tiny tremor of its wings, as though it dreamed of something far beyond the walls that held them both. The rain outside softened, now only a whisper against the glass, the storm exhausted but still restless, like it waited for permission to sleep. He rubbed his hands together, the warmth creeping back into his fingers, and he looked at the creature again, trying to understand what he was seeing. The scales too fine to be reptile, the wings too small to belong to any bird, the smell faintly like ash and rain, mixed with something that reminded him of old coins he had found once in a forgotten drawer at the back of the museum. Each breath it took sent a faint shimmer through the air like heat rising from pavement. He could not look away, even though a small part of him wanted to be afraid. He thought of calling someone, the security guard who worked mornings, maybe the night supervisor who never answered his phone, but the idea of voices coming into this quiet felt wrong. This moment was too fragile, too real to survive. Explanation, he knew what they would say. They would laugh, tell him to sleep, tell him he had been alone too long, that he had imagined the sound, the shape, the voice, but the creature was there, real, warm, alive, and that was enough. It stirred then, one golden eye opening to look at him again, slow, cautious. He lifted his hand, unsure what gesture might mean comfort to something that was not human, and when his fingers brushed the edge of its wing, the creature did not move away. Instead it sighed, a sound so deep and strange it seemed to echo from somewhere ancient. The heater hummed louder, the room felt smaller, and he realized how loud silence could be when he found himself speaking, though he did not mean to, words spilling out like dust from a forgotten drawer. He told it his name, told it how he had worked here 15 years, how the night had become his companion, how the world outside had stopped asking for him a long time ago. The creature blinked, listened, its head tilting slightly as if understanding every word. He wondered if it could truly hear him, or if his voice was just another sound to fill the dark. He reached for his thermos, poured a little warm water into a lid, and placed it near the creature. It sniffed once, then drank with a small flick of its tongue, steam curling up as its breath met the water. He smiled, though it felt strange on his face, the kind of smile that came from somewhere long forgotten. He leaned back again, closing his eyes, the hum of the heater steady, the sound of rain now distant, the creature's breathing soft and even, and for the first time in years he did not feel alone. The museum no longer a cage, but a shelter built just wide enough for two. The janitor woke to the faint sound of something moving, the soft scrape of claws against tile, the heater still humming its low steady rhythm. The air warm and thick with the smell of dust and faint smoke. He blinked his eyes, opened the light above him, flickering just enough to reveal the small figure by his side, the creature stretching, its wings slow and unsure, tiny sparks running down the edges like threads of lightning trapped beneath skin. It turned toward him, eyes brighter now, glowing like gold behind water, and for a long moment neither of them moved. He sat up, his joints aching, his shirt clinging to his skin from where the rain had dried. He looked at the creature and saw that it no longer shivered. Its scales dry, now glimmering, faint shades of blue and green that shifted each time it breathed. He wanted to speak, but the words caught somewhere between his chest and throat. He had spoken to empty rooms for so many years, but to this living thing he had no language ready. The creature tilted its head, its pupils narrow like blades, and then its mouth moved, its voice small, fragile but clear. The same question from the night before. "Can I sleep here tonight?" it said again, as if testing the shape of the words, and he felt the sound of it more than he heard it, a vibration that sank deep beneath his ribs. He nodded, slowly, unable to trust his voice, and the creature made a low sound that might have been a sigh or something close to laughter. He reached out a hand palm, opened. The creature hesitated before placing one clawed foot against his skin. The warmth surprised him, alive, sharp, almost electric. He felt the pulse of something vast, something old, something that did not belong in a world made of walls and floors. It stared at him, unblinking, its breath rising in thin silver threads that faded into the air like forgotten prayers. He asked quietly, "What are you?" but the creature only looked away, eyes drifting toward the window where the first faint light of dawn began to bloom across the glass. Its wings fluttered slightly, sending a ripple of gold through the shadows. The janitor followed its gaze, the sky outside gray soft, the rain slowing, the city still asleep. He thought how strange it was that something so impossible could look so tired, so small, so human in its loneliness. He spoke then about the museum, the empty nights, the silence that sometimes felt too big to live inside. He told it about how people never saw him, not really saw him, only the broom, only the keys, only the tasks, and the creature listened without moving, eyes half closed, like it understood what being unseen felt like. He did not expect an answer, and yet when he fell silent it said softly, "I know," and the words broke something in him, gentle and necessary. He laughed, a little under his breath, not from humor but from relief. He had not realized until that moment how long it had been since anyone had said "I know," and meant it. The creature curled closer to the heater, its eyes dimming with the weight of sleep, and he leaned back against the wall, feeling the warmth spread across the room, slow and patient as the storm faded into memory. Outside, the light of morning slid quietly through the high windows, painting the marble floor in pale gray. The janitor blinked against it, his neck stiff from where he had slept against the wall. The hum of the heater softer now, the air no longer heavy with storm. The creature still beside it, curled small like a coiled flame, its breath slow, sending thin wisps of smoke into the air. He stayed still for a long time, just watching the way the light caught the edges of its wings, the way it flickered like something caught between dream and waking. He rose slowly, stretching his arms, his knees cracking the sound loud in the vast empty room. He reached for his cart, his motions automatic. The broom, the bucket, the old rag. He wiped at a patch of dirt near the door, not because it mattered, but because habit had taught him that work was the only way to keep the world steady when it threatened to tilt. He looked back every few moments, afraid the creature might vanish like a mirage born from loneliness, but it stayed, breathing steady, a small shimmer of color against the dull floor. He thought of coffee, the one comfort the museum's tiny break room offered. He poured what was left from the pot, bitter and cold, and poured a little water into a cracked cup, setting it near the creature. It stirred, eyes opening, slow gold, meeting gray again. He smiled, uncertain, and said softly, "Morning," though he doubted it knew a word. The creature blinked once, twice, and then lowered its head to the cup, steam curling from the surface. As it drank, he thought the water would go cold, but instead it warmed as the creature touched it, a faint glow pulsing through the cup like an ember waking an ash. He stared, the warmth brushing his fingers through the metal. He whispered, "You did that," but the creature only tilted its head again, wings twitching as though embarrassed. He laughed quietly, a sound he barely recognized. It had been years since laughter lived here. The echo of it made the walls less lonely. He sat beside the heater, the broom across his knees, and spoke about nothing and everything, about how the world outside would soon fill with noise and faces, and how none of them would ever believe this story if he tried to tell it. The creature listened, its tail curling around itself, its breath steady. It did not speak, but when he fell silent, it made a soft hum, a low vibration that filled the room. It was not words, but it felt like an answer, the kind of sound that said, "I hear you," without needing to say anything at all. He felt it in his bones, the same way he had once felt the rhythm of the city trains long ago when he was young and waiting for someone who never came back. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work, and thought maybe this was what they had been made for, not fixing lights or sweeping floors, but holding something fragile enough to remind him that warmth was still possible. The creature yawned, tiny sparks escaping its mouth before fading to nothing, and he smiled again, the sound of its breath steady against the hum of the heater and the faraway pulse of the morning world. The hours passed slow and gentle, like the drift of dust through light. The museum still empty, the city beyond its walls waking without them. The janitor sat with his back to the wall, his hands resting on his knees, the small creature now awake and watching him from its place beside the heater, its wings folded neat against its sides. Eyes bright and still, the room felt different, filled with something invisible, a hum of quiet life that made even the silence seem alive. He spoke without planning, 2 words tumbling out as if they had been waiting for years behind his teeth. He told the creature about the first time he walked into this building, about how he thought it was too grand for a man like him, about how the floor had shone so bright it almost hurt to look at. He told it about the nights he had spent chasing echoes down the corridors, about the things he thought he saw moving in the corners, about the way the wind found its way through the smallest cracks to remind him that the outside world still existed. The creature listened, head tilted slightly, golden eyes never blinking, its tail flicking now and then against the floor as if in rhythm. With his voice he told it about the woman he used to wait for outside the train, stating the way she would bring him coffee when the mornings were cold, and how one day she simply stopped coming. He told it about the years that followed, how quiet could turn from friend to stranger if you stayed with it too long. He did not cry, because the tears had long ago turned into something heavier, something that only lived in words. The creature shifted closer, inch by inch, cautious as if approaching a wild thing, then rested its head on his boot, the scales warmed through the worn leather. He froze, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever delicate understanding had formed between them. It hummed again, that low sound that filled the air like a heartbeat, not his, not its own, but something shared. He felt it through the floor, through his bones, through the years he had spent pretending he needed no one here. reached down slowly, his fingers brushing over the smooth curve of its neck. The skin warm and soft beneath the scales. It did not pull away. Instead, it leaned into the touch with a small sound that might have been contentment or trust. He could not tell. The light from the window shifted again, tracing faint gold lines along the marble. He thought of all the mornings he had seen pass unnoticed, and how this one somehow felt like the first. He whispered, "You must be hungry," though he had nothing to offer but the remains of his sandwich from the night before. He broke it in half, placed a piece near its mouth. It sniffed once, and to his surprise took its small sparks, rising as it chewed. He laughed again, shaking his head at the sight of a creature born of myth eating bread from his hand, and yet it felt right, as though the world had folded in on itself. Until only this small corner mattered. He leaned back, once more closing his eyes for a moment, the sound of breathing his and its weaving together into something steady, the kind of quiet that healed instead of hollowed. And he thought maybe the museum had been waiting all these years, not for visitors or crowds, but for this, for something alive enough to remind it how to listen again. They moved through the museum like a ghost, sunlight sliding over glass and bone. The janitor and the hatchling still hidden in their corner near the heater. He had drawn the blinds just enough to keep the light soft and the world distant. He knew the staff would arrive soon, the footsteps, the voices, the keys jangling like reminders that reality had not disappeared yet. For now, though, there was only the quiet hum of the air vents and the faint sound of the small creature breathing beside him. He watched it stir, its eyes blinking open, slow like embers, remembering fire, its scales brighter, now catching the thin lines of sunlight that slipped between the blinds, each color shifting from blue to gold to pale silver with every breath it stretched its wings, the sound like silk torn in half, soft but full of power. The janitor felt the air change, a faint warmth pulsing outward from where it stood. The heater flickered, and for a moment he wondered if the warmth came from the machine or from the creature itself. He said quietly, "You should not be here." They would not understand. His voice cracked in the middle as though his throat remembered how to be lonely. The creature tilted its head as if listening, then it stepped closer, its claws tapping against the tile, one slow step after another, until it stood before him, small and certain. Its eyes met his, and he felt the strange weight of that gaze again, ancient and kind both at once. It pressed its head gently against his hand, and for a moment he forgot what he had said. He thought of all the mornings he had walked these halls alone, pushing his broom through the dust left by thousands of feet that had never noticed him, how he had spoken to the statues when no one else would, how he had convinced himself that silence was enough, but now that silence felt full alive. It held something more than emptiness. It held this creature, this impossible small miracle breathing beside him. He felt the edges of himself soften, as though the world had finally stopped looking through him. Outside, the first car horns began, the faraway sound of people moving toward their lives, the kind of noise that meant the night was over and the day had reclaimed everything. But here, in this small space between light and shadow, the janitor stayed perfectly still, not wanting to break what had been given. The creature looked toward the door, its tail flicking slow, its wings trembling slightly as if sensing what waited beyond. He said, "You can stay as long as you like," but even as he spoke, he knew the world would not allow it. He had seen what happened to things that did not fit, things that were too strange, too gentle for the kind of noise that lived outside the glass. He thought of cages, of headlines, of scientists with cold hands and sharper eyes, and his chest tightened at the thought of anyone else finding it. The creature seemed to understand. It looked at him with something like sadness, its eyes softer now. It stepped close once more, brushed its snout against his chest, and he felt a rush of warmth spread through him, the kind that filled all the hollow spaces he had tried to ignore. For years he did not move, he only breathed and let the moment carve itself into memory, the way sunlight carves shapes through dust to build and groan softly. Above them, a sound of waking, of change. The janitor knew the moment would not last, but he also knew that something inside him had already changed. The silence between them, no longer a burden but a promise of something that could never be forgotten, no matter what morning demanded. When it finally came, the morning came fully now, the kind of light that had weight to it, spilling across the museum floors, revealing every mote of dust, every trace of life that had lingered through the night. The janitor blinked against it, his body stiff from stillness, his mind heavy and slow, the sound of footsteps echoing faintly from the far hallway. The day staff coming in early, their voices distant and muffled. He turned toward the heater, his heart tightening before his eyes even finished the motion. The small blanket lay there folded neatly, the faint shimmer of scales gone from its surface. For a long moment he did not move. He waited as though the creature might still be hiding somewhere. Behind the cart, or beneath the desk, waiting for his call. The silence felt thicker now, not empty, but full of something left behind. He rose slowly, his knees aching, the echo of last night still humming faint beneath his skin. He looked toward the door and saw the faintest trail of wet footprints, tiny and perfectly distinct, across the clean tile to where the morning light pooled like gold on water. He followed them one by one, each print fading as the warmth of the sun touched it, until there was nothing left but the memory of motion. He reached the door and found it slightly ajar, the lock undone, though he could not remember turning it. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the handle, still warm, not with heat but with the ghost of touch. He looked through the glass and saw the sky stretched wide and soft, the storm gone, the world washed clean as if rewritten overnight. He whispered, "You could have stayed," though the words felt small and fragile against the light. The wind outside answered in soft, breathless sighs, moving through the cracks at the edge of the door. He thought for a moment he heard wings, the faint rush of air that came with them, but when he stepped outside there was only stillness, the parking lot wet and shining, the puddles reflecting the pale morning clouds. He stood there until the cold began to bite through his shirt, and then turned back inside. The museum seemed different, somehow brighter, alive, the echoes no longer hollow, the air carrying a whisper of warmth that could not be explained. He walked back toward the heater and found something resting on the broom, a single scale no bigger than his thumbnail, glowing faintly blue and gold. It pulsed with light, like a heartbeat, then dimmed until it was only a shimmer of color. He picked it up between his fingers, the surface smooth and warm, and as he held it he felt the same pulse he had felt when he lifted the creature in his arms, the quiet rhythm that told him he had been seen. He placed the scale in his pocket and returned to his cart, the sound of keys and wheels echoing through the halls, the other workers passing him without notice. As always he smiled at that, because it no longer mattered. He had something in his pocket that proved he was not invisible. He looked once more toward the glass roof, the sunlight spilling through, and thought he saw something move high above, a flicker of gold against the blue, just for a heartbeat. Then gone again. He stood there, broom in hand, surrounded by light, feeling the faint warmth against his chest where the scale rested, and for the first time in all his years the emptiness of the museum did not feel like loneliness but like peace. And when he began to sweep the floor again, his steps found a rhythm softer and lighter, as though some part of the sky had decided to stay with him after all.